Welcome to Audiobook's Vault. In this video, we will summarize the book The Courage to be Disliked by FUMITAKE Koga and ICHIRO KISHIMI. Let's start. Part 1. First Night. Denied Trauma. The first night of the dialogue sets the philosophical foundation of Adlerian psychology by challenging common perceptions of trauma, determinism, and personal identity. It begins with the young man questioning the philosopher's optimistic worldview, which asserts that people can change, and leads to discussions about the nature of trauma, the simplicity of the world, and the power of choice in shaping one's life. Is the world simple? The philosopher opens with a bold claim. The world is simple. He argues that complexities arise not from the external world itself, but from how individuals perceive and interpret it. The young man finds this perspective naive, asserting that the world is inherently complicated and shaped by uncontrollable external factors. The philosopher counters by stating that people tend to overcomplicate life as a way to justify inaction or avoid responsibility. To illustrate, the philosopher suggests that life can be understood as a series of subjective interpretations rather than objective realities. Events in the world are neutral, they gain meaning only through the lens of the observer. This perspective empowers individuals to simplify their lives by focusing on how they interpret and respond to situations rather than being overwhelmed by external circumstances. People can change. The young man expresses skepticism about human capacity for change, believing that personalities and behaviors are fixed by factors like upbringing and genetics. The philosopher challenges this belief, claiming that people have the ability to change at any moment if they choose to. He introduces the concept of teleology, which focuses on goals rather than causes. According to Adlerian psychology, human behavior is not driven by past events, causality, but by future aspirations and chosen purposes. For example, if someone behaves in a certain way because they believe they are shy, it is not their past experiences that determine their shyness. Instead, they have chosen the behavior to achieve a specific goal, such as avoiding social situations. By recognizing this self-imposed limitation, the individual has the freedom to change their behavior and pursue different goals. The philosopher emphasizes that change requires courage, the courage to confront deeply held beliefs and embrace the discomfort of new possibilities. Change is not easy, but it is always within reach for those willing to take responsibility for their lives. Trauma does not exist. This section introduces one of the most provocative ideas in the book. Trauma, as commonly understood, does not exist. The young man strongly objects, arguing that traumatic events leave lasting scars that shape a person's behavior and identity. The philosopher acknowledges that events can be painful, but contends that they do not determine a person's future. Adlerian psychology views trauma as a narrative constructed by the individual to explain their current state or behavior. For instance, a person might say, "I can't succeed because I had a difficult childhood." This explanation, according to the philosopher, is a choice rather than a fact. The individual is using the past to justify avoiding the challenges of change and growth. The philosopher further explains that while the past is unchangeable, it does not define a person's present or future. Instead of being bound by causality, individuals can reframe their experiences and focus on what they can do now to create the life they want. Why people create trauma? If trauma does not exist, why do people create it? The philosopher suggests that people use trauma as an excuse to avoid taking responsibility for their lives. By attributing their struggles to past events, they can evade the discomfort of self-reflection and change. This process is often unconscious. For example, someone might claim that they cannot trust others because of a betrayal in the past. However, this trauma serves a purpose. It allows the person to avoid the vulnerability and risk associated with forming new relationships. The narrative of trauma provides a sense of security and justification for their current behavior. The philosopher emphasizes that this does not mean the person is lying or deliberately deceiving themselves. Rather, it reflects an unconscious choice to prioritize safety over growth. Recognizing this choice is the first step toward breaking free from self-imposed limitations. Who I am. The discussion shifts to the question of identity. The young man argues that one's identity is shaped by external factors, such as upbringing, culture, and social expectations. The philosopher disagrees, asserting that identity is not something we inherit or receive from others, it is something we create. According to Adlerian psychology, the self is not a fixed entity but a dynamic process. People constantly define and redefine themselves through their actions and choices. This means that the true self is not determined by past experiences or external labels but by the goals and values a person chooses to pursue. The philosopher uses an analogy to illustrate this point. Identity is like a book being written in real time. While the previous chapters provide context, they do not dictate how the story will unfold. Each person has the freedom to write their own narrative, regardless of their past. This perspective is liberating but also daunting. It places full responsibility for one's life in their own hands. The philosopher acknowledges that this level of freedom requires courage, the courage to accept oneself as the author of their own story. You are not determined by your past. The final section of the first night reinforces the central idea that the past does not determine the present. The young man argues that his past failures and hardships have left him incapable of achieving success or happiness. The philosopher counters by pointing out that this belief is a choice, not a fact. Adlerian psychology rejects the idea of determinism, the belief that one's life is controlled by external factors such as genetics, upbringing, or past experiences. Instead, it advocates for a future-oriented approach, where individuals focus on their goals and aspirations rather than their perceived limitations. The philosopher introduces the concept of the separation of tasks. He explains that individuals should focus only on what is within their control, such as their actions and decisions, rather than worrying about things they cannot change, such as other people's opinions or past events. By adopting this mindset, individuals can free themselves from the burden of their past and take meaningful steps toward personal growth. To illustrate, the philosopher shares an example of someone who fears public speaking because of a past failure. If they continue to avoid public speaking, they reinforce the belief that their past defines them. However, if they choose to confront their fear and take action, they demonstrate that the past has no power over their present or future. Conclusion. The first night of the dialogue challenges deeply ingrained beliefs about trauma, identity, and the influence of the past. The philosopher argues that life is simple, people can change, and individuals are not bound by their past experiences. By rejecting determinism and embracing the power of choice, people can take control of their lives and pursue their goals with courage. This perspective is both empowering and unsettling. It removes the comfort of blaming external factors for one's struggles and places full responsibility on the individual. However, it also offers a path to freedom and self-actualization. By recognizing that trauma is a narrative rather than a fact, and that identity is a choice rather than a fixed trait, individuals can liberate themselves from self-imposed limitations and create the lives they desire. Part 2. Second night. All problems are interpersonal relationship problems. In the second night, the philosopher and the young man delve deeper into Adlerian psychology, focusing on the concept that all human problems are rooted in interpersonal relationships. The discussion addresses self-dislike, feelings of inferiority, the drive for superiority, and the role of competition. The philosopher emphasizes that overcoming these challenges requires an understanding of one's goals and responsibilities in relationships. Why you dislike yourself? The young man begins by confessing that he often dislikes himself, believing he is fundamentally flawed. He feels inadequate and blames his personality and circumstances for his unhappiness. The philosopher challenges this view, asserting that self-dislike is not a natural state but a choice influenced by one's interactions with others. The philosopher explains that people dislike themselves because it serves a purpose: avoiding interpersonal conflicts and the challenges of self-improvement. For instance, someone might say, "I'm incapable of socializing because I'm shy," to avoid the discomfort of engaging with others. This self-dislike becomes a shield, protecting them from failure, rejection, or vulnerability. The philosopher stresses that self-acceptance is key to overcoming this mindset. Disliking oneself is not an objective reality but a subjective interpretation. By reframing how one views their own value and worth, individuals can break free from this self-imposed limitation. All problems are interpersonal relationship problems. Building on the discussion of self-dislike, the philosopher introduces a core tenet of Adlerian psychology. All human problems stem from interpersonal relationships. He argues that people's struggles, whether related to anxiety, anger, or dissatisfaction, can be traced back to how they interact with others and their perceived place within society. The young man is skeptical, suggesting that some problems, such as personal failure or self-esteem issues, are internal and unrelated to relationships. The philosopher counters by illustrating how even seemingly individual problems are influenced by interpersonal dynamics. For example, feelings of inadequacy often arise from comparisons with others, societal expectations, or a desire for approval. The philosopher explains that human beings are inherently social creatures, and their sense of self is shaped by their relationships. Even when people are alone, they carry the influence of others in their thoughts, goals, and behaviors. Recognizing this interconnectedness helps individuals address the root causes of their struggles rather than treating the symptoms. Feelings of inferiority are subjective assumptions. The young man confesses that he often feels inferior to others, believing that these feelings are an unavoidable consequence of his weaknesses and failures. The philosopher challenges this view, asserting that feelings of inferiority are not objective truths but subjective interpretations. According to Adlerian psychology, feelings of inferiority are a natural part of being human. Everyone experiences moments of inadequacy, but these feelings are not inherently negative. They can serve as motivation for growth and self-improvement. Problems arise, however, when people allow these feelings to dominate their self-perception, leading to self-sabotage or avoidance behaviors. The philosopher distinguishes between objective inferiority, such as being shorter or less skilled in a particular area, and subjective inferiority, the emotional interpretation of those differences. While objective differences exist, the subjective meaning individuals attach to them determines their impact. For example, someone may view being less experienced in a field as a reason to learn and grow, while another person may see it as proof of their incompetence. The philosopher emphasizes that feelings of inferiority are a choice. By reframing these feelings as opportunities for growth rather than evidence of failure, individuals can transform their mindset and behavior. Striving for superiority is healthy. The young man expresses concern that striving for superiority is inherently selfish and harmful. The philosopher clarifies that striving for superiority is not about dominating others but about improving oneself and contributing to society. Adlerian psychology views this drive as a healthy and natural aspect of human behavior when channeled appropriately. The philosopher distinguishes between two forms of striving for superiority. Healthy striving, focused on personal growth and benefiting others. This involves setting goals that align with one's values and contributing to the greater good. Unhealthy striving, driven by a desire to compete, dominate, or seek validation. This form often leads to dissatisfaction and conflict. For example, a student who strives to excel academically because they are passionate about learning and want to make a positive impact is engaging in healthy striving. Conversely, a student who seeks to outperform peers solely to boost their self-esteem or gain recognition is engaging in unhealthy striving. The philosopher emphasizes that true superiority is not achieved through competition but through self-actualization. By striving to be the best version of oneself, individuals can find fulfillment and contribute meaningfully to their communities. The two objectives of behavior. The philosopher introduces the idea that all human behavior is goal-oriented and serves two primary objectives. To be accepted. People seek to belong and feel valued within their social groups. This need for acceptance drives many of their actions, from seeking approval to avoiding rejection. To avoid pain. People aim to minimize discomfort, whether physical, emotional, or social. This often involves avoiding situations that might lead to failure, criticism, or conflict. The philosopher explains that these objectives influence how individuals interpret their experiences and shape their behavior. For example, someone who fears rejection might avoid expressing their opinions or pursuing relationships. While this strategy reduces short-term pain, it perpetuates feelings of isolation and dissatisfaction. The philosopher encourages the young man to examine his goals and motivations. By understanding the objectives behind his behavior, he can make conscious choices that align with his values and aspirations. This self-awareness is essential for breaking free from patterns of avoidance and self-sabotage. Life is not a competition. The young man struggles with the idea that life is not a competition, arguing that society constantly reinforces competitive values. From school to work to relationships, people are encouraged to compare themselves to others and measure their worth through external achievements. The philosopher rejects this worldview, asserting that competition is a construct that undermines personal growth and happiness. He explains that comparing oneself to others leads to feelings of inferiority, resentment, and dissatisfaction. Instead, Adlerian psychology advocates for a horizontal perspective, where people see themselves as equals rather than competitors. The philosopher uses an analogy to illustrate this point. Life is like a dance, not a race. In a race, the goal is to outperform others, creating winners and losers. In a dance, the goal is self-expression and enjoyment, where each person's performance is unique and valuable. By adopting this mindset, individuals can focus on their own growth and contributions rather than being consumed by comparisons. The philosopher also highlights the importance of community and cooperation. In a competitive environment, people prioritize their own success over collective well-being, leading to conflict and isolation. In a cooperative environment, people support one another and work toward shared goals, fostering a sense of belonging and fulfillment. Conclusion. The second night of the dialogue explores the profound impact of interpersonal relationships on human behavior and well-being. The philosopher argues that all problems are rooted in relationships, whether with others or oneself. Feelings of inferiority, self-dislike, and competitive tendencies stem from misguided goals and interpretations, which can be reframed through conscious effort and self-awareness. Key takeaways from this discussion include: self-dislike is a choice influenced by interpersonal dynamics and can be overcome through self-acceptance. Feelings of inferiority are subjective and can serve as motivation for growth when viewed positively. Striving for superiority is healthy when focused on self-improvement and contribution rather than competition. Understanding the objectives behind one's behavior, seeking acceptance and avoiding pain, helps individuals make intentional choices. Life is not a competition. Adopting a cooperative, non-comparative mindset fosters growth and fulfillment. By embracing these principles, individuals can navigate interpersonal challenges, build meaningful relationships, and find greater happiness and purpose in life. The philosopher emphasizes that this transformation requires courage, the courage to reject societal norms, take responsibility for one's actions, and pursue a life aligned with one's values. Part 3. Third night. Discard other people's tasks. The third night delves into the challenges of interpersonal relationships and introduces Adlerian principles to address them. The dialogue emphasizes that much of life's conflict and dissatisfaction stem from misunderstanding the boundaries of personal and others' responsibilities. The philosopher introduces the concept of separating tasks as a liberating practice, allowing individuals to live authentically, free from the burdens of external expectations. Why interpersonal relationships bring strife. The young man opens the discussion by expressing frustration with interpersonal relationships. He believes they are a source of unavoidable strife, as people constantly clash over differing values, expectations, and opinions. The philosopher acknowledges that relationships are a central aspect of life, but argues that the strife arises not from relationships themselves, but from a lack of understanding about their purpose and dynamics. The philosopher explains that relationships often bring conflict because individuals conflate their responsibilities with those of others. For example, a parent may try to dictate their child's choices, believing it is their duty, while the child resents the lack of autonomy. Similarly, a person may feel burdened by the need to meet societal expectations, leading to resentment and dissatisfaction. The philosopher highlights that the primary cause of relationship strife is a failure to recognize and respect boundaries. When people take on tasks that are not their own or attempt to control others' actions, they create unnecessary conflict. By understanding and respecting these boundaries, individuals can reduce friction and build healthier relationships. The difference between trust and confidence. The discussion shifts to the distinction between trust and confidence. The young man argues that trust is conditional, earned through consistent behavior and reliability. He believes that relationships falter because people cannot trust one another fully. The philosopher counters this view, asserting that trust is not about conditions or guarantees. Instead, trust is an act of courage, choosing to believe in someone without requiring proof. He distinguishes trust from confidence. Confidence is based on evidence and past performance. For example, you might have confidence in a colleague's ability to complete a task because they've done it successfully before. Trust is a leap of faith, independent of past actions. It involves believing in someone's potential and goodwill without needing assurance. The philosopher emphasizes that trust is essential for meaningful relationships. However, it also requires accepting vulnerability and the possibility of betrayal. This willingness to trust others, even without guarantees, is an act of courage and a sign of maturity. Do not live to satisfy the expectations of others. The young man expresses frustration with societal expectations, which he feels dictate how he should live his life. He resents the pressure to conform and fears judgment if he chooses a different path. The philosopher challenges this mindset, arguing that living to satisfy others' expectations leads to a loss of autonomy and authenticity. The philosopher introduces the idea of living your own life. He explains that people often make decisions based on what they think others want, rather than what aligns with their own values and goals. This behavior stems from a desire for approval and a fear of rejection. However, it ultimately results in dissatisfaction and a lack of self-fulfillment. To illustrate, the philosopher shares an example of a student who chooses a career path to please their parents. While the parents may be happy, the student feels unfulfilled because the decision was not their own. The philosopher argues that true happiness comes from living in accordance with one's own values, even if it means disappointing others. This perspective requires the courage to be disliked. It means accepting that not everyone will approve of your choices and being willing to face criticism or rejection. By prioritizing your own values over external approval, you can live a more authentic and fulfilling life. How to separate tasks. A central concept of Adlerian psychology, introduced in this section, is the separation of tasks. The philosopher explains that much of life's conflict arises from people taking on tasks that are not their own or interfering with others' tasks. By clearly distinguishing between your responsibilities and those of others, you can reduce unnecessary stress and focus on what truly matters. The philosopher outlines 3 steps to separate tasks. Identify the task. Determine whether a given task is yours or someone else's. For example, deciding how to spend your time is your task, while how others respond to your choices is their task. Let go of others' tasks. Recognize that you cannot control other people's actions or feelings. Trying to do so leads to frustration and conflict. For instance, if someone criticizes you, it is their task to manage their opinion, not yours to change it. Focus on your own tasks. Take responsibility for your own actions, decisions, and feelings. By focusing on what you can control, you free yourself from the burden of trying to manage others. The philosopher emphasizes that separating tasks does not mean abandoning compassion or connection. Instead, it allows for healthier relationships by respecting boundaries and fostering mutual autonomy. By focusing on your own tasks, you can approach relationships with greater clarity and purpose. The courage to be disliked. The young man struggles with the idea of being disliked. He fears that living authentically and separating tasks will lead to rejection and isolation. The philosopher acknowledges that this fear is valid but argues that seeking universal approval is an impossible and self-defeating goal. The philosopher explains that being disliked is a natural consequence of living authentically. When you make choices based on your own values, you will inevitably encounter people who disagree or disapprove. However, this does not mean you should intentionally provoke or harm others. Instead, the goal is to live in alignment with your values, even if it means accepting disapproval. The courage to be disliked is not about rejecting relationships or becoming indifferent to others. Rather, it is about prioritizing your own happiness and self-respect over the need for external validation. This courage allows you to build genuine relationships based on mutual respect and understanding, rather than fear or obligation. The philosopher also emphasizes the importance of maintaining a sense of community. While it is important to live authentically, it is equally important to contribute to the well-being of others. The key is to strike a balance between individual autonomy and social connection. Conclusion. The third night of the dialogue provides practical insights into addressing the challenges of interpersonal relationships. By understanding the roots of conflict and embracing the principles of Adlerian psychology, individuals can build healthier, more fulfilling connections with others and themselves. Key takeaways from this discussion include: interpersonal conflict arises from misunderstandings about boundaries and responsibilities. Recognizing and respecting these boundaries reduces strife. Trust is an act of courage, requiring vulnerability and a willingness to believe in others without guarantees. Living to satisfy others' expectations leads to dissatisfaction and a loss of authenticity. True happiness comes from aligning your actions with your own values. The separation of tasks is a powerful tool for reducing stress and conflict. By focusing on your own responsibilities and letting go of others' tasks, you can live more freely. The courage to be disliked is essential for living authentically. Accepting disapproval allows you to prioritize your own happiness and build genuine relationships. By adopting these principles, individuals can navigate the complexities of relationships with greater clarity and purpose. The philosopher emphasizes that this journey requires courage, the courage to take responsibility for one's own life, reject external pressures, and embrace the freedom to live authentically. Part 4. Fourth night. Where the center of the world is. The fourth night of the dialogue between the philosopher and the young man explores deeper themes in Adlerian psychology, such as the role of recognition, the feeling of community, self-centeredness, and finding meaning in life. The philosopher encourages the young man to embrace the courage to be normal and to view life as a collection of meaningful moments, rather than a pursuit of status or recognition. Where the center of the world is. The young man begins by asking about his place in the world, expressing a sense of disconnection and frustration. He feels as though the world does not revolve around him and is dissatisfied with his perceived lack of significance. The philosopher responds by challenging the young man's perspective, suggesting that his dissatisfaction stems from a self-centered worldview. The philosopher explains that everyone views the world through their own subjective lens, often placing themselves at the center. This egocentric view leads to a desire for special treatment, recognition, and validation. When reality fails to meet these expectations, feelings of resentment and inadequacy arise. The philosopher argues that the world does not revolve around any single individual and that finding fulfillment requires shifting the focus away from oneself. By recognizing that everyone is equally important and interconnected, individuals can cultivate a sense of belonging and purpose. This shift in perspective allows people to engage with the world in a more meaningful and cooperative way. Deny the desire for recognition. The young man confesses that he often seeks recognition and approval from others, believing that these external validations will bring him happiness and fulfillment. The philosopher challenges this belief, arguing that the desire for recognition is a trap that leads to dissatisfaction and dependence. The philosopher explains that seeking recognition is a form of extrinsic motivation, where one's sense of self-worth is tied to external validation. This mindset creates a vicious cycle. The more one seeks approval, the more dependent they become on others' opinions, and the less autonomous they feel. Even when recognition is achieved, it often feels fleeting or insufficient, leading to a constant craving for more. Instead of seeking recognition, the philosopher encourages the young man to focus on intrinsic motivation, acting in alignment with his values and goals without regard for others' opinions. By prioritizing personal growth and self-respect over external validation, individuals can find lasting fulfillment and freedom. The philosopher acknowledges that denying the desire for recognition requires courage. It means accepting that not everyone will approve of your choices and being willing to face criticism or indifference. However, this courage is essential for living authentically and achieving true happiness. The goal of interpersonal relationships is a feeling of community. The young man expresses skepticism about the purpose of interpersonal relationships, questioning whether they are worth the effort and strife they often involve. The philosopher responds by introducing Adler's concept of the feeling of community, which he describes as the ultimate goal of human relationships. The philosopher explains that human beings are inherently social creatures, and their well-being is deeply tied to their connections with others. However, these connections are not about seeking approval or fulfilling obligations. Instead, they are about contributing to the well-being of others and finding a sense of belonging within a community. That feeling of community involves recognizing that you are a part of a larger whole and that your actions impact those around you. This perspective fosters cooperation, empathy, and a sense of purpose. It shifts the focus from competition and individual achievement to collaboration and mutual support. The philosopher emphasizes that achieving this sense of community requires letting go of self-centeredness and the desire for recognition. By contributing to the greater good without expecting anything in return, individuals can build meaningful relationships and find fulfillment. Why am I only interested in myself? The young man admits that he often prioritizes his own interests and struggles to empathize with others. He wonders if this self-centeredness is an inherent flaw or a natural part of human behavior. The philosopher reassures him that this tendency is not unique or insurmountable, but rather a common challenge rooted in fear and insecurity. The philosopher explains that self-centeredness often arises as a defense mechanism. People focus on themselves because they fear rejection, failure, or vulnerability in their relationships. This inward focus creates a barrier to meaningful connections and prevents them from experiencing the feeling of community. To overcome self-centeredness, the philosopher encourages the young man to cultivate a sense of gratitude and empathy. By appreciating the contributions of others and recognizing their struggles, individuals can shift their focus outward and build stronger relationships. This practice also helps to reduce feelings of isolation and dissatisfaction, as it fosters a sense of connection and purpose. The philosopher acknowledges that overcoming self-centeredness requires effort and self-awareness. It involves challenging ingrained habits and choosing to act in ways that prioritize the well-being of others. However, this shift is essential for achieving the feeling of community and living a more fulfilling life. The courage to be normal. The young man struggles with the idea of being normal, fearing that it means living an insignificant or unremarkable life. He aspires to achieve greatness and worries that embracing normalcy will prevent him from reaching his full potential. The philosopher challenges this perspective, arguing that the pursuit of greatness often leads to unhappiness and a lack of authenticity. The philosopher explains that society places a high value on achievement and recognition, creating pressure to stand out and excel. However, this mindset is based on a comparative view of life, where self-worth is determined by how one measures up to others. This perspective fosters feelings of inadequacy and a constant need for validation. In contrast, Adlerian psychology advocates for the courage to be normal, the willingness to live a life that aligns with your values and priorities, even if it does not garner recognition or applause. This courage involves rejecting societal expectations and embracing your own unique path. The philosopher emphasizes that being normal does not mean settling for mediocrity or avoiding challenges. Instead, it means accepting yourself as you are and finding fulfillment in everyday experiences. By letting go of the need for greatness, individuals can focus on what truly matters and live a more authentic and satisfying life. Life is a series of moments. The young man expresses a sense of existential anxiety, feeling overwhelmed by the uncertainty and impermanence of life. He wonders how to find meaning and purpose in a world that seems chaotic and fleeting. The philosopher responds by offering a perspective grounded in the present moment. The philosopher explains that life is not a linear journey toward a specific goal or destination. Instead, it is a series of moments, each with its own value and significance. By focusing on the present rather than dwelling on the past or worrying about the future, individuals can fully engage with their experiences and find meaning in everyday life. The philosopher uses the analogy of climbing a mountain to illustrate this point. While reaching the summit may be a goal, the true value of the journey lies in the steps taken along the way, the challenges overcome, the sights seen, and the connections made. Similarly, life's meaning is found in the process of living, not in achieving a particular outcome. This perspective requires letting go of rigid expectations and embracing uncertainty. It involves finding joy in small, ordinary moments and recognizing that each day offers opportunities for growth and connection. By adopting this mindset, individuals can live more fully and authentically. Conclusion. The fourth night of the dialogue explores profound themes related to self-centeredness, recognition, community, and the meaning of life. The philosopher encourages the young man to shift his perspective from external validation to intrinsic motivation, from competition to cooperation, and from future-oriented goals to present-moment awareness. Key takeaways from this discussion include: the world does not revolve around any single individual. Fulfillment comes from recognizing our interconnectedness and contributing to the greater good. The desire for recognition is a trap that leads to dependence and dissatisfaction. True fulfillment comes from acting in alignment with your values, independent of others' opinions. Interpersonal relationships are not about seeking approval, but about fostering a feeling of community and mutual support. Self-centeredness stems from fear and insecurity. By cultivating gratitude and empathy, individuals can build meaningful connections and overcome feelings of isolation. The courage to be normal involves rejecting societal pressures to achieve greatness and finding fulfillment in living authentically. Life's meaning is found in the present moment. By focusing on everyday experiences and appreciating the journey, individuals can live more fully and joyfully. By embracing these principles, individuals can navigate life's challenges with greater clarity and purpose. The philosopher emphasizes that this transformation requires courage, the courage to reject societal norms, take responsibility for one's life, and find meaning in the ordinary moments that make up each day. Part 5. Fifth night. Live like you're dancing. The fifth and final night of the dialogue serves as a culmination of the teachings of Adlerian psychology, emphasizing the concept of living freely and authentically. The conversation centers on the themes of freedom, purpose, and living fully in the present. The philosopher challenges the young man to embrace a life that resembles dancing, free-flowing, joyful, and focused on the moment, rather than one burdened by past regrets or future anxieties. What is freedom? The dialogue begins with the young man asking what it means to be truly free. He associates freedom with the absence of constraints, such as societal expectations, obligations, or the need for recognition. However, the philosopher explains that this view of freedom is incomplete and rooted in a misunderstanding. The philosopher argues that true freedom is not about escaping constraints, but about living authentically and taking responsibility for one's choices. Freedom involves the ability to act in alignment with your values and goals, independent of external pressures or opinions. It is not granted by others, but is something you claim for yourself through courage and self-awareness. The philosopher acknowledges that freedom comes with challenges. It requires letting go of the desire for recognition, the fear of failure, and the need for control. These attachments often keep people trapped in patterns of avoidance and dependence. By confronting these fears and embracing uncertainty, individuals can experience the liberation of living authentically. This perspective shifts the focus from external circumstances to internal agency. The philosopher emphasizes that freedom is not about changing the world, but about changing how you engage with it. By taking responsibility for your life and actions, you can achieve a sense of autonomy and fulfillment. The Youth's Manifesto. The young man, inspired yet conflicted, presents his manifesto for life. He expresses a desire to live authentically, free from societal expectations and the pursuit of recognition. However, he also struggles with doubts about whether such a life is realistic or meaningful. The philosopher responds by affirming the young man's aspirations and encouraging him to refine his manifesto. He explains that living authentically does not mean rejecting all societal norms or isolating oneself from others. Instead, it involves finding a balance between individual autonomy and social connection. The goal is to live in alignment with your values while contributing to the well-being of others. The philosopher encourages the young man to view life as a creative endeavor. Just as an artist creates a painting or a dancer choreographs a routine, individuals have the power to shape their lives through their choices and actions. This perspective empowers people to take ownership of their lives and embrace their unique paths. The manifesto becomes a declaration of courage, a commitment to live authentically, take responsibility for one's actions, and find meaning in the present moment. It is not a rigid plan or a set of rules, but a guiding principle for living a fulfilling life. Give meaning to seemingly meaningless life. The young man raises a profound question. How can life have meaning if it is ultimately fleeting and impermanent? He struggles to reconcile the transient nature of existence with the desire for purpose and significance. The philosopher addresses this existential dilemma by reframing the concept of meaning. He explains that life does not have an inherent or predetermined meaning. Instead, meaning is something individuals create through their actions, relationships, and experiences. It is not found in the grand or eternal, but in the everyday moments that make up life. The philosopher emphasizes that even seemingly mundane or meaningless activities can become meaningful when approached with intention and purpose. For example, a simple conversation or a small act of kindness can have a profound impact on others and contribute to a sense of community. By focusing on these moments, individuals can find fulfillment and purpose in their daily lives. This perspective challenges the young man to let go of the need for a universal or ultimate purpose. Instead, he is encouraged to embrace the freedom to create his own meaning and to find joy in the process of living. The philosopher likens this approach to gardening. Just as a gardener nurtures plants without expecting eternal results, individuals can nurture their lives and relationships with care and intention. Living in the here and now. The philosopher introduces the idea of living in the here and now as a key principle for a fulfilling life. He explains that people often become trapped in regrets about the past or anxieties about the future, which prevent them from fully engaging with the present moment. The philosopher argues that the present is the only time that truly exists. The past is unchangeable, and the future is uncertain. By focusing on the present, individuals can make the most of their experiences and take meaningful action. This shift in perspective allows people to break free from the burden of past mistakes and the fear of future challenges. To illustrate this concept, the philosopher uses the analogy of dancing. When you dance, your focus is not on reaching a destination, but on the act of dancing itself. Similarly, living in the here and now involves immersing yourself in the present and finding joy in the process, rather than fixating on outcomes or goals. The young man initially struggles with this idea, as he is accustomed to setting long-term goals and striving for achievements. However, the philosopher explains that living in the present does not mean abandoning goals or plans. Instead, it means approaching them with a sense of mindfulness and intention, without becoming overly attached to specific results. By embracing the present moment, individuals can experience a greater sense of clarity, gratitude, and fulfillment. This perspective also fosters resilience, as it encourages people to focus on what they can control and let go of what they cannot. The greatest life. The dialogue concludes with a discussion of what it means to live the greatest life. The young man seeks a definition of success and fulfillment that aligns with the principles they have discussed. The philosopher offers a perspective that emphasizes process over outcome, relationships over achievements, and presence over perfection. The philosopher explains that the greatest life is not one defined by external accomplishments or recognition. Instead, it is a life lived authentically, with courage and intention. It is a life in which you take responsibility for your choices, contribute to the well-being of others, and find joy in the present moment. The philosopher emphasizes that greatness is not about standing out or being extraordinary. Rather, it is about embracing the ordinary and finding meaning in everyday experiences. The courage to be normal, discussed earlier, is a key aspect of living the greatest life. The young man reflects on this perspective and begins to see that fulfillment comes not from striving for perfection or avoiding failure, but from engaging fully with life as it is. He recognizes that the greatest life is one that aligns with his values, nurtures his relationships, and allows him to grow and contribute. The dialogue ends on a hopeful note, with the young man expressing a renewed sense of purpose and a commitment to living authentically. He resolves to embrace the freedom, responsibility, and joy of living like he is dancing, present, engaged, and unencumbered by the past or future. Conclusion. The fifth night serves as a powerful conclusion to the dialogue, encapsulating the core teachings of Adlerian psychology and offering practical guidance for living a fulfilling life. The philosopher challenges the young man to embrace freedom, create his own meaning, and live fully in the present. Key takeaways from this discussion include: true freedom is about taking responsibility for your choices and living authentically, independent of external pressures or opinions. Meaning is not inherent but created through your actions, relationships, and experiences. Even seemingly mundane activities can become meaningful when approached with intention and purpose. Living in the here and now involves focusing on the present moment, letting go of regrets about the past and anxieties about the future, and finding joy in the process of living. The greatest life is not defined by external achievements or recognition, but by authenticity, courage, and meaningful relationships. It is about embracing the ordinary and finding fulfillment in everyday experiences. By adopting these principles, individuals can navigate life's challenges with greater clarity, purpose, and joy. The philosopher's vision of living like you're dancing offers a liberating and inspiring approach to life, one that prioritizes presence, authenticity, and connection over the pursuit of perfection or recognition. If you enjoyed the summary, then like the video and subscribe to Audiobooks Vault. Tell us if there is any other book you want us to summarize. Goodbye.